So tonight, continuing with our new series on Marxist idols for destruction, bearing in mind that the sin most condemned in the Bible is idolatry. Tonight, the Mandela myth and idolatry industry. Now, considering we've just been marching to Parliament on the 21st anniversary of Nelson Mandela legalizing abortion, 1st of February 1997, this is quite appropriate. We even have a Mandela Day and the making of a new religion. In November 2009, the United Nations General Assembly declared the 18th of July Nelson Mandela International Day. It's his birthday. This, they said, was in recognition of the former South African president's contribution to the culture of peace and freedom. The General Assembly resolution recognizes Nelson Mandela's values and his dedication to the service of humanity in the fields of conflict resolution, race relations, the promotion and protection of human rights, reconciliation, gender equality, and the rights of children and other vulnerable groups, as well as the upliftment of poor and undeveloped communities. It acknowledges his contribution to the struggle for democracy internationally and the promotion of a culture of peace throughout the world. Wow. Now, with songs of praise and hymns glorifying Nelson Mandela being sung by choirs and taught to school children, I know in a Christian school, which my son was part of for a while, they were taught to sing hymns of praise to Mandela. I have been in St. George's Cathedral downtown when a choir sung hymns of praise to Mandela with their fists in the air as well while they were singing it in a cathedral. We seem to be seeing the birth of a new religion. The ancient pharaohs were worshipped as gods. In fact, that's a lot of what they had in their walls and in their temples, and the Sphinx and the pyramids, which are basically, especially the pyramids are tombs actually. It might have taken something in a region of 80,000 people their whole lifetime to build this tomb for one man, but it wasn't just the man who got buried there, but whole armies sometimes, servants and others, entombed or killed or given poison to die with this man, to go with him into the next life, and so on and so forth. And they've got the Valley of the Kings, and Ataturk was very much worshipped like a new god in Turkey. Mussolini had some serious idols built for himself, including in Abyssinia. The chairman of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union were elevated to cult status. Vladimir Lenin, who led the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, 100 years ago, his tomb continues to be a site of pilgrimage to this day, from the very beginning. Atheists who don't believe in the afterlife were visiting his tomb and worshipping the relics of this corpse. And they built a very elaborate mausoleum, and the people came by the millions. It's estimated that something in the region of 80 million people have walked past Lenin's tomb. I think that might exceed the amount of people who've been to Disney World. And what are they seeing? An embalmed corpse, really. In fact, this isn't even the body of Vladimir Lenin, because the taxidermists weren't very good. His fingers fell off, the nose fell off, the ears fell off. It's basically Madame Tussauds waxworks. But every 1st of May, throughout the Soviet Union, the Soviet banners and weapons would be marched past Lenin's tomb, and standing above Lenin's bones was the Politburo of the Soviet Union. The symbolism, the religious act. 1st of May. This is May Day. This is a really big religious day in our occult calendar. And so this is the whole Soviet Union, big deal, massive. And they're doing this on a corpse. And what did he achieve? Well, the Holodomor, the bitter harvest that destroyed millions of lives in the Ukraine by forced famine, taking all their food and starving the workers to death. Stalin continued what Lenin had begun. When Joseph Stalin was dictator of the Soviet Union, the cult of the chairman reached new heights, or rather depths. And again, they were always marching past their trilogy, Marx, Engels, Lenin, and this is, the trilogy of evil. And all their weapons passing by in Red Square. Even in China, Stalin was being worshipped in Chinese with these kind of massive busts and pictures and icons and statues. The people on the streets weren't so impressed. Here's East German youth throwing rocks at the T-34 tanks. burning pictures of Stalin, burning pictures of Lenin in Budapest 1956, pulling down statues of Stalin 1956 in Hungary and Budapest, smashing it. Here the Hungarians protesting about the Soviet Union controlling Hungary. The Prague Spring of 1968, destruction of the city, the people trying to make a stand for their country being absolutely flattened. This isn't Second World War pictures. This is 1968 in Prague, the so-called Prague Spring. Well, 1989, down came the idols of Lenin, and tens of thousands of idols of Lenin and Stalin and Marx across the Soviet Union were toppled. Even in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. In Romania, the Communist Party General Secretary Nicolae Ceausescu became the focal point of emperor worship. The world had not seen such emperor worship since the time of the Caesars. Over 8,000 hymns of praise were composed honoring the communist dictator Ceausescu. Every child began a school day singing hymns of praise to Ceausescu. Literally millions of his pictures adorned homes, offices, schools, government buildings. This, back in Romania in 1989, before the Berlin Wall came down. Well, by the end of the year, had things changed. They cut out all the communist hammers and sickles, red stars are their flags, exorcised the flag of the communist insignia, and the people were celebrating Christmas for the first time in 45 years. Well, in Korea, in China, you have communist idolatry, and anyone who did not worship the state god, shot in the back. Here's the face of resistance. Some brave student, Chinese student, standing up with just his textbooks in front of Russian-made T-62 tanks right there in Tiananmen Square. In Kazakhstan, in North Korea, you get the celebrity cults continuing. Hollywood continues to produce many celebrity cults. In fact, it's an idolatry industry. But the extravagant praise and idolizing of Nelson Mandela as a hero, martyr, ideal example has exceeded all bounds. The mythology and the idolatry surrounding the Mandela cult is startling. And it sort of revolves around, he introduced democracy in South Africa. Apparently there was no voting before 1994. And he brought in freedom, democracy, and wow, yes, there's all kinds of choices, but when it gets down to it, there's only one party that gets the majority every time. It's the Mandela Party, the people's choice. Well, the people are told it's their choice. And a lot of people were killed. Thousands of people killed in the run-up to the elections in faction fighting between Mandela's group, the ANC, and Chief Gatsha Buthelezis Inkatha Freedom Party. But Mandela had to be the first president in 1994. That was settled, even though the observers agreed and admitted that the majority of the votes cast in 1994, the first multi-racial, one-man, one-vote ballot, unqualified franchise elections. It wasn't the first elections, it wasn't the first democratic elections, it was the first common vote on a common voters roll for all races. Everyone had the vote before, but they were voting for separate voters rolls, trans guys, cis guys, and so on. But everyone agreed that they never counted all the votes. The IEC never had the time to count even half the votes. They ran out of time, and everyone had been invited to the Mandela inauguration, beatification, enthronement, whatever they wanted to call it. And so they were all going to come, and they had to have results. And so they said we did some extrapolations and horse trading and decided on the percentages for the different parties. They didn't count all the votes. In fact, there were container loads, by that I mean like 20-foot, 18-ton container loads of ballots that weren't opened, were just incinerated. That's the first free elections in South Africa. They never got around to counting all the votes because they ran out of time. They were so disorganized. They just extrapolated. So much for every vote counts. But Mandela had been a choice anyway, and so even though they hadn't counted more than half, they hadn't even counted half the votes, they inaugurated a new flag and all that, and South Africa's great day apparently, and yay, the people's choice, hero, Madiba, and presidential inaugurations and all the rest. But after victory, then what? Well, Nelson Mandela Day. what's Nelson Mandela Day for? Well, this is basically meant to replace Christmas. Mandela Day is not just a once-off. This is a serious religious cult being begun. And 67 minutes. Why 67 minutes? Well, because Mandela apparently gave 67 years to public service. I don't know what you call planting bombs and organizing riots, but anyway, let's not argue that, because no less an authority than Jimmy Carter said, Nelson Mandela has given all of us a wonderful opportunity and also a duty to do something positive and active on Mandela Day. So what are you going to do on Mandela Day? Well, people decide you can change the world by making an imprint, and there's all kinds of Mandela worship. This is from a pornographic newspaper that continues to print porn, The Sun. Face painting, very popular with the Causa witch doctors and also with us now. And Mandela shirts and Mandela hands and what will you do? And so you've got a whole lot of people out there to do different active projects. Like, Christians aren't doing this sort of thing all the year round anyway in missions and ministries and charities, but this is done with a trumpet on the street corners, and it's a big deal, and you've got to publish selfies of yourself doing it, and cakes and all kinds of in schools, even these poor pre-primary schools. I mean, honestly, this is brainwashing on a high order. And why put a scripture or a prayer on your sandwiches that you're handing out when you can rather quote from Nelson Mandela? Far more inspiring than something just from the Psalms or the scriptures. And, you know, as we let our own light shine, now wait a minute, isn't that sort of harking back to Jesus say something about that in the Sermon on the Mount? But don't worry about that. We've got Nelson Mandela. He's the new Messiah. And, yep, this just is, as Jesus said, when you do good, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. But they don't work that way. So you've got a whole lot of people out there doing religious acts of devotion to Mandela on the 18th of July. And this is like a new religion. It's completely a new religion. And this is idolatry on such a high order. And just look at the kind of statues and posters and banners and awards and national identity cards and renaming universities, setting up websites, front page of newspapers, posters. Mandela Day human chain. What's a human chain? We know what a life chain is. We do that every year around the world, making a stand against abortion, which he legalized and promoted. So what's a human chain? I think it's some kind of meaningless chain like this where you stand around, and what are you doing? I mean, who are you praying to? What actually is the force and power? Or is it just some inner force that comes out from within you? And yep, wall art, graffiti, and so on, and it just carries on. Put your hands all over the place. And I think this is brilliant, because here you've got all this graffiti stuff, but look at the razor wire. Yep, we never needed that before Mandela freed us, but now we need to wrap our back gardens in high walls and razor wire. And this is meant to be an improvement on art in a gallery or on the wall. Make a donation to his charities. Oh, you know, the Nelson Mandela charities have come up in the Hague International Court of Justice, because when they had Charles Taylor, the dictator, mass murdering thug of Liberia, on trial in the Hague, there was Naomi Campbell, some kind of supermodel, was testifying that when she was a guest of Nelson Mandela in the President's Palace in Cape Town, she was given a handful of diamonds by Charles Taylor. Obviously blood diamonds. We know he is the king of blood diamonds, meaning people's hands chopped off and this, that and the other. Just the whole hideous, everything bad about blood diamonds. And so she, for services rendered, gets a handful of diamonds put into her hand. For whatever reason, she decides not to try and pass this through customs or get that sold in Britain or America, wherever she's going. So Naomi Campbell testifies in court. She gave them to Nelson Mandela in his hand personally as a contribution to the Nelson Mandela's Children's Fund. The only problem is that when they checked, there's no record of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund ever receiving diamonds or anything to the value of those diamonds from Mandela at that year at all. So here's somebody making a donation, a very high-profile person testifying in an international court of justice. She gave a handful of diamonds, blood diamonds, mind you, from Charles Taylor into the hands of Mandela as a donation from her to the Nelson Mandela's Children's Fund. You know, if somebody had given us something worth any amount for a charity and it didn't end up in a charity, this would be a crime, this would be a scandal, this would be extortion. I mean, there's a whole lot of things you could talk about it, and such a person would probably be disgraced. But Mandela, well, he could do all sorts of things. And so Mandela Foundation, why are you needing to donate to the Nelson Mandela Foundation? I mean, he came out of jail and became a millionaire and then became a billionaire. And not too sure he did. He must have been really good at investments, because obviously he couldn't be guilty of corruption. But somehow or another, this person on 200,000 Rand a year as president for 5 years made millions and then billions. Long Walk to Freedom should be read by every person alive. Why? Is it like the Bible? Is this a new Bible? And of course we had these stamps. In fact, I remember when these postage stamps first came out, and we had a mailing, a Frontline mission mailing, and somebody came in with these thousands of stamps with Mandela's head, and I said, there is no way on earth we're putting a Nelson Mandela stamp on a Frontline Fellowship mission mailing. Go and get other stamps. I said, well, we'll have to get several stamps. Doesn't matter. Replace it. You know, we'll get a 20 and a 25 and whatever. But so at this point, a story went around saying that these new Mandela stamps weren't sticking on the envelopes, and so the government initiated an inquiry, and after millions of rands investigation, it came to the conclusion that the reason why the stamps weren't sticking on the envelopes is people were spitting on the wrong side. So you've got all kinds of things, stamps, coins. I mean, really, Robben Island, his mug is even on the money now. And, well, that's maybe appropriate because he's taken the rand from where the rand was one of the most powerful currencies in the world to one of the weakest. When I went to Britain and America the first time, I got more dollars and pounds for my money, for my rand, than I had rand, because the rand was stronger than the pound and the dollar back in the 70s and 80s. And even when Mandela got in after vicious war, international sanctions, riots all over the country and all that, the rand was still 2 rand to the dollar when Mandela became president. But under him, it went down to 12 and even touched 14 rand to the dollar just after he left office in the days of Mbeki. So in his time, it went from 2 rand to the dollar to 10 to 12 rand to the dollar under Mandela. And that without sanctions, without a war, without conscription, and with massive foreign aid. That's quite an achievement. So yes, maybe his face should be on the money to remind us how worthless it is. I remember when you could fill a car for 5 rand. Fill the tank. Full. 5 rand. Totally. And now you can put 100 rand in and your needle still be on empty. I mean, that's... Thank you, Nelson Mandela. Freedom. You remember? I've been to some of these meetings where they've spoken about the born frees. How many born frees are there here? They would ask. And my daughter was singing at a concert, and it was the 20th anniversary of South Africa's democracy. So the Cape Town Youth Choir was there. And up stood F.W. de Klerk of all people and asked, how many born frees are there? So I immediately raised my hand. And I'm told by, no, take it. Well, I was born free. I was born before burglar bars, security gates, razor wire. I could walk anywhere, anytime. I just had to be back at home before the sun set. My parents didn't care. I could never be locked out of home because the doors weren't locked. And if the front door was locked, you could get in the back door. And if it was ever locked, which I don't remember it ever being locked, you could get in through windows because there were no burglar bars. I mean, I was born free. But now, the poor kids born since 1994 who live with burglar bars, razor wire, security gates, armed response, alarms, motion sensors and all this, even in churches, they called the born frees? I mean, does anyone know what the word freedom means? Have they looked in the dictionary lately? But yeah, let's keep producing more pictures, more icons, more graffiti. Madiba, yep, the way he used to be, and when he was the smooth lawyer, and just before he ended up in prison, and let's bring out more art and even more art, and let's have whole art exhibitions for Madiba, and let's have more and more people produce art, good, bad, or indifferent, but nevertheless, even let's have sand castle art for Mandela and cupcakes. I mean, how kitsch can you get? And this sort of reminds you of the Roman Catholic idea that you're eating your God. And woodwork and metal busts, there's a whole industry on this. I mean, okay, you might have chased away a lot of investment in industry, but at least there's a Mandela industry going, like clothes and and the 46664 concert. Why? Because 46664 was his prison number, and this became a whole Mandela tour, and this number became something he patented, and he made it an event, or his managers, his marketers made it an event. And next thing you know, there's Madiba clothing, which is branded, and some people want to walk around with this, with a mark of 666 on themselves, which, you would have thought somebody's read Revelation 13 and knows this isn't a good idea. Why would you want 666 on anything that you're wearing? Madiba shirts, and these things cost more than they're worth, and don't worry, because he gets it. But you can also get tattoos. Madiba tattoos, isn't this super attractive? And you've got Martin Luther King Jr., or Marxist Lucifer King, as we spoke about last week, and Malcolm X, and Obama, and that's apparently meant to be Mandela. Anyway, we'll forgive them. And you go to London, and what do you see outside the British Palace of Westminster, House of Commons? A statue to a terrorist, actually, a Marxist terrorist. Sometimes people have come and left an automobile tire there, remind people of necklace murders. But mind you, this isn't too inappropriate, because he's right next to another idol of the New World Order, Winston Churchill, who we'll get to on another occasion, who I suppose he's in fair company. And this is just another piece of art of Mandela out there, and there's no end to statues of Mandela out there. And here are releasing pigeons. I mean, is this religious or what? Santon has got Nelson Mandela Square, and this sort of reminds you of a Daniel chapter where's this? Daniel chapter 4, where they have this Daniel 3, where they've got the statue put up by Nebuchadnezzar, which you've got to bow down to. And this is a big statue, and you can just think what Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego would say to this. And now, Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality. Did they build a municipality from? No. It just took Port Elizabeth and Uitenhage. They renamed the whole thing. Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University. They built a Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University for tomorrow? Really? But wait a minute, I've seen this before. This is the University of Port Elizabeth. We've been there. We've run missions conferences there. Bless the Nations on. They didn't build him a university at all. They just renamed an existing one. I mean, that's cheap. That's really cheating. That's, if you want to honor someone, build them something. But to take something already built by somebody else and then rename it. But all these buildings were there long before Mandela got out of prison, but now they've just renamed University of Port Elizabeth Nelson Mandela Metropolitan. And Cruella de Vil decided to rename our Settlers Way Nelson Mandela Boulevard. Why? Why not build him a road? But no, they don't want to build him a road. They want to rename an existing road. Like she's just renamed the Boys Drive after some PAC terrorist. So this kind of honoring him on the cheap, renaming existing structures after Nelson Mandela, like this bridge, it just is really and truly, that's just not even honest. And so you get no end. The Mail and Guardian, which is meant to be a journalistic publication, they're meant to report the news, not launch a new religion and bow down to a new world idol. And Center of Memory, selling of a legend. That is a good term, the selling of a legend. Selling. This is marketing, this is mass marketing the Mandela idol. And so Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, Madiba in our prayers. Prayers? They believe, who are they praying to? Aren't these the people who, Nelson Mandela is the man who stopped prayer in Parliament. For 128 years, Parliament in Cape Town was opened in prayer in the name of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ with scripture reading. Mandela stopped that. And there were protests even asking him to please at least have a minute of silence. And he said no. He wouldn't even allow a minute of silence. No acknowledgement of a higher source of authority than the Parliament themselves. Mandela did that. He's the one who outlawed prayer in Parliament. And now we're meant to pray for him. But who are we praying to? Because he didn't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so you can continue with all kinds of... This is a church stained glass window scene. Well, at least they've got his fingers open, not in a fist on this occasion. Choirs have sung songs and hymns in praise of Nelson Mandela. Concerts and events have been organized in his honor. Massive posters have been erected in civic centers, such as in Cape Town, which is ridiculous because Cape Town's never voted for him anyway. The Department of Education has apparently replaced education, teaching children how to think critically, with indoctrination, teaching children what to think. In order to enable Nelson Mandela to be entered into the Guinness Book of Records, various publicity stunts have been promoted, abusing our schools, including requiring children of all ages in the classroom to write birthday cards to Nelson Mandela and to sing happy birthday to him on 18th July to create new records. And so you've got every year they'd come up with a new one. Nelson Mandela had received the most birthday cards of any person in the world. Well, when it's a requirement in a classroom, you all got to do it and even provide them with the cards and everything else. And it's just this. But wait a minute, the Department of Education is meant to be teaching the children education. And now they're using it for some political stunt, for some communist, in order to get him into the Guinness Book of Records. And next year, you're all going to sing happy birthday from same time. So Nelson Mandela is the person who had the most amount of people sing happy birthday to someone. I mean, you can... If you're in charge of Department of Education, you can abuse this for all sorts of things. Now school children are being required to write tributes and dedications praising Nelson Mandela. My son came back from this Christian independent school with this assignment and asked me, what must he do? And I said, well, you don't have to write tribute. You can just do an objective evaluation of him. They can't command your conscience. He said, no, they said it's got to be positive. So I contacted the principal. I actually went to see the principal, who informed me, no, it had to be a positive tribute. And I said, can you think of any country, I mean free country in the world, where school children could be required to write a tribute to any politician? I said, I personally think that Margaret Thatcher's the greatest British Prime Minister of the 20th century, maybe ever. But I don't think it would be reasonable to expect every school child in Britain to write a tribute to her, because some of the families may not think so. Same thing about Ronald Reagan. I think that Ian Smith is the finest Prime Minister in my lifetime. I don't think I could expect every single person to write a tribute to him. Where on earth do you find a free country requiring children to write tribute to any politician? And she agreed that this wasn't reasonable, but it was a directive to all schools from the Ministry of Education. Here's a British school. What does this have to do with education? Or what has any of this got to do with education? But this is on the walls of a school classroom in England. This is deeply disturbing on many levels. Are pro-life Christians expected to put our values to one side and deify the man who ramrodded through Parliament against all opposition his bill legalizing abortion in our country? Over 1.5 million babies have been killed officially, legally, in South Africa with taxpayers' money since President Nelson Mandela signed the Termination of Pregnancy Bill the 1st of February 1997. Life begins at conception. Abortion is murder. I'm not going to write a tribute to the man who pushed abortion upon this country against all opposition. Abortion kills babies. Every abortion stops a beating heart. A lot of us feel very strongly about this. One heart stops, another heart breaks. We are not going to honor a man who legalized abortion. No. And this is what we're protesting about, especially on the 1st of February, on the anniversary of Mandela's legalizing of abortion. I was once asked in Parliament, this is back in the 1990s when he was president, I think it could have been Carl Niehaus who actually asked the question, give us one verse, just one verse in the Bible that forbids abortion. I said, easy. Exodus 20 verse 13. You shall not commit murder. No, I mean abortion. I said, I'm talking about abortion. You shall not commit murder. No, I want a verse in the Bible about abortion. That's the sixth commandment. You shall not commit murder. No, he said. I said, yes, life begins at conception. It's a biological fact. You know, it's even taught in universities. 3 weeks after conception, heartbeats can be measured. 6 weeks after conception, a brainwave is measurable. Every abortion stops a beating heart. The Bible forbids the taking of innocent life. Abortion is the taking of innocent life. You shall not commit murder is the verse. And he went a bit ballistic, but I mean, we made our point. We went to Parliament on the anniversary of the legalization. This is 1998, and had a picture of it. This is in the room where Mandela announced the legalization of abortion. We had a prayer vigil with 100 people gathered to pray, and fortunately there were even a couple of parliamentarians there to pray prayers of repentance. It's a crime. It's wicked. It's evil. And I got to meet with Nelson Mandela after we marched to Parliament and protested a whole lot of his policies and dealt with this very issue. But abortion is the ultimate child abuse. A person is a person no matter how small. It's not a matter of size or age. It's a matter of life. Life begins at conception. And this is the scripture banner that the Mbeki characters came and confiscated and burned. Beautiful scripture banner, actually. Very sad to have seen that burned, but that's what they think of that scripture verse. Making a stand outside the gates of Parliament, on TV, outside Mary Stopes' abortory. They used to have this sign up there. They've taken it down because they realized they were just providing us a backdrop for our pictures. And now they've got some ridiculous picture of Be Empowered, which I don't know that we've ever seen people looking that empowered when they come out of Mary Stopes' abortory. But we've been making a stand there for quite a while. And I think this is what we've got to do. Be faithful. In God's court, abortion is murder. And that's the ultimate court. And that's why we invest in these trailers and visual art in order to communicate to people the crime of Nelson Mandela and his cronies. Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. Yet the UN General Assembly may speak of Nelson Mandela's promotion of the rights of children and other vulnerable groups, but under his presidency, pornography was legalized in this country for the first time in history. The South African Police Service's Child Protection Unit reported that child rape increased the next year 400%. My wife came back from a preschool parents meeting, with a book from the Child Protection Unit's services, which Thabo Mbeki later abolished the whole unit. But they had this document in this government printed police report about how since pornography was legalized in South Africa in 1996 was the legalization of pornography, how child rape increased 400%. And that was their own statistics, not something we produced. That's the government stats. CNA, Central News Agency, publishing all kinds of garbage, which we protested against. Belleville Arts Association abused the Belleville Library Civic Centre here, made stands. In came Adultery World with this character came from Australia and started this chain store here. And so all of this is the legacy of Mandela. Pornography, which exploits people made in the image of God. SABC, somebody counted hundreds of, I think it was 280 something blasphemies in a given week on one channel of SATV that was calculated by a survey. And we went there to present a yellow card to SATV that with the third command listed on it. ETV or Evil TV, how many times we've gone and demonstrated there for their blasphemous nonsense and pornographic garbage. I will set before my eyes no vile thing. We produced Finding Freedom from the Pornography Plague, and Taryn more recently much updated The Porndemic. We must be making a stand, loving our neighbor. Pornography is the theory, rape is the practice. The General Assembly resolution may speak of Nelson Mandela's dedication to the service of humanity and gender equality. But under him, pornography was legalized, prostitution effectively decriminalized. They haven't been prosecuting pimps and prostitutes since the days of Mandela. Human trafficking exploded in South Africa. including mafia groups coming in from Russia and elsewhere. And the traffic is hideous. And they wanted to legalize prostitution openly in time for the 2010 World Cup soccer. And we've many a time had to be at Parliament to protest. Incidents of rape exploded exponentially in the country as sex shops and pornography were for the first time allowed in this country. The family is the basic building block of society. The foundations for a successful society are laid in characters, minds, and lives changed by the grace of God. In order to be successful, a society needs to be made up of individuals of integrity, compassionate families. For any nation to be strong, the families need to be strong. Pornography is waging a war against the family. It's particularly targeting men who are meant to be the providers, the protectors, and the leaders of the family. It is the devoted Christian husbands and dedicated fathers who are the bedrock of any civilized society. However, it's these very men who are being targeted by the exploitative industry of pornography. Now, you would have thought that any responsible government, with the emphasis being on responsible, would want to do everything in their power to protect families and those who hold families together, the husbands and the fathers. However, it would appear that many modern governments, especially the ANC, are hell-bent on not only imploding the economy, but undermining the essential foundations for any civilized society. And those responsible individuals, like Nelson Mandela, and parties like the ANC, promoting legalized pornography and prostitution and abortion, are not offering us progress. They're offering us regression to the most base, vulgar, primitive behaviors, which is the antithesis of civilization. I think, to be fair, I need to add here the DA is not much different on these matters than the ANC. Evil as the ANC have been, the DA also stand for legalized abortion, pornography. They voted for it too. And they are even more. They often mock the ANC that the ANC doesn't do as much for the gay and the gay marriage agenda as the DA does. And they claim they've got more gays in their party than the ANC. So don't think that the DA is a Christian antithesis to the ANC. They're just a secular humanist competitor. Public nakedness, permissiveness, prostitution, and human sacrifices were practiced in every culture before Christian civilization, which transformed their lives and their communities. By legalizing pornography and promoting permissiveness, secular humanists are not offering you progress. They're destroying centuries of progress. They're returning us to paganism. So the exploitative industry of pornography and all the sexually orientated businesses, the SOBs, that flourish and fester around it, it only grows at the expense of the general well-being of a society as a whole. It's a parasitic industry. It undermines the economy. It wastes vast amounts of time, money, energy, and productivity. It erodes the essential foundations for any sound economy of the family. Just one example, 087 dialer porn. This came about in Mandela's second year of presidency, 1996. Telkom launched 087 dialer porn, where you get charged an extra amount. Now, bear in mind, the money at that stage was worth a lot more than it is now. 1997, 21 years ago. The Old Mutual reported that their phone bill at the end of the first month was 5 million rand at the Pinellas headquarters. 5 million. Now, knowing that they had 5,000 employees at the time, if only half of them engaged in it, I mean, you just work out how much money was wasted by every employee on the 087 dial call, not counting the time that they were being paid to work that wasn't being used. But just consider how much time and money is wasted by these parasitic industries. By glamorizing adultery, by encouraging promiscuity, pornography has played a key role in the breakup of many families. As family men make up the overwhelming majority of law-abiding, hard-working, tax-paying, stable, productive citizens, it is economic suicide for any society to tolerate pornography. It's also cultural suicide, and it invites the wrath of God and judgment upon a society that can tolerate such an abominable perversion. Pornography is also a health issue. The flood of sexually exploitative magazines, videos, websites, which have been allowed to pollute the minds, the morals, the marriages, has greatly aggravated the health crisis. By stimulating sexual promiscuity, pornography has had the effect of greatly accelerating the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, which includes AIDS and HIV, but there's 65 other hideous ones which in your face by Doctors for Life documents. So the General Assembly of the UN may claim that Nelson Mandela contributed to a struggle for democracy internationally and the promotion of a culture of peace throughout the world, but he was always supporting dictators. Mandela closed down South Africa's embassy to the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan and opened up South Africa's embassy in communist China, a one-party dictatorship with one of the most brutal human rights records on earth. Nelson Mandela welcomed to South Africa the longest reigning dictator in the world, Fidel Castro. He gave him the highest award this country has to offer. Mandela assembled both Houses of Parliament for Fidel Castro to address, a very rare privilege. I actually can't think who else has had the privilege of addressing our joint sittings of Parliament. So, Mandela says, from its earliest days, the Cuban Revolution has itself been a source of inspiration for all freedom-loving people. Then why did 3 million Cubans risk their lives swimming across the Caribbean to escape from this one-time island paradise, now hellhole? Of course, he totally supported Mugabe's Zimbabwe. Despite the killing fields, the blood diamonds of Robert Mugabe, his massacre of the Matabele, his butchering of opposition, killing of dissent, destroying of the farms, destroying the greatest agricultural economy north of the Limpopo River. Now, these are just a few examples of farms in old Zimbabwe with what they are now. See, that's the same place. Progress. On the left you see the evil capitalist farm, and on the right you see a liberated farm. There we go. Same on the left and on the right. You see, change is not always progress. That's what, land reform can do this to your farms too. This is what they've done in Zimbabwe. And this is what Mugabe supported. He supported all of this. The worst racism, destruction, assaults, brutality. They can't even spell their name right at the entrance. Half of the entire population of Zimbabwe have fled the workers' paradise. He's loved communist China, Gaddafi's Libya, and I mean, just to warm your heart, you can see how Uncle Fidel and Nelson Mandela were really in a hugger fest, and they really loved one another deeply. I mean, you really just wonder. And then you get the African Communist, the Journal of the Southern Communist Party. Well, do you know, when this picture was published in the New York Times, they whited out the background because they didn't want to confuse people with the facts. Because some people might have got the impression that Nelson Mandela was a communist. I mean, he's standing next to KGB Colonel Joe Slovo, who was his handler. He's standing next to Winnie Mandela, his so-called wife, who was the necklace queen, who kept saying, with our box of matches, we're going to liberate our country. 1,000 black town councillors, mayors, elected officials amongst the black people were necklaced, burned alive by Winnie Mandela's thugs. She herself tortured a 12-year-old boy, Stompy, to death and got found guilty in court and upheld on appeal, sentenced to 5 years in jail for torture and murder, but never served a day because she's a Mandela, even though the court sentenced her to jail. That hammer and sickle could give you the impression Nelson Mandela is a communist. Better to white that out. We wouldn't want our readers to get that impression. The UN Declaration describes Nelson Mandela as a prisoner of conscience. However, the fact is that even Amnesty International refused to take on Nelson Mandela's case while he was in jail, because they said he's not a political prisoner. He had committed numerous violent crimes, he had had a fair trial, he had had a reasonable sentence. The most radical newspapers of the day, like the Star and the Rand Daily Mail, praised the leniency of the court in giving the lightest possible sentence for such violent crimes. In 1964, anyone in America or Britain or France who committed such crimes would have been executed. If someone had committed the crimes Mandela pleaded guilty to in courts in South Africa, in America he would have been electrocuted. In Britain he would have been hung. In France they would have guillotined him in 1964. Even the Rand Daily Mail, the most outspoken liberal newspaper in the country, virtually communist, a supporter of Mandela and of the ANC, wrote about the sentence passed on by the judge. The sentence pronounced by Judge de Wet at the close of the Rivonia trial are both wise and just. The law is best served when there is a firmness tinged with mercy, and this was the case yesterday. The sentences could not have been less severe than those imposed. The men found guilty had planned sabotage on a wide scale and had conspired for armed revolution. As the judge pointed out yesterday, the crime of which they were found guilty was really high treason. The death penalty would have been justified. This is what the Rand Daily Mail said in an editorial. Mandela had nothing to forgive. He was treated super graciously and generously. These are the facts of history. Sentencing Mandela to imprisonment instead of having him hanged was an act of mercy on the part of his political enemies, this under Hendrik Verwoerd, much maligned. Mandela had therefore every reason to be grateful and no reason to harbour a grudge against them, for he owed his life to them. He wouldn't have pardoned someone's life who was guilty of those kind of crimes against him. Nelson Mandela was the head of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the terrorist wing of the ANC and of the Southern Communist Party. He pleaded guilty to 156 acts of public violence, including mobilizing terrorist bombing campaigns, which planted bombs in public places, which even incinerated a grandmother and her grandchild. This included the Johannesburg railway station bombing, where many innocent people, including women and children, were killed by Nelson Mandela's Umkhonto we Sizwe terrorists. President Obama, when condemning the Boston bombings, declared any time bombs are used to target innocent civilians, it is an act of terror. To which I say a hearty amen. Even a stopped clock can be right twice a day. And here is one time I can actually agree with something Nelson Obama said. Obama denounced the Boston bombings as cruel, savage and malevolent, which I agree with. But he honors a man responsible for many such terrorist attacks. He praised Mandela as his role model. But Mandela targeted innocent civilians. So, okay, these two characters were responsible for the Boston bombing. So imagine if the one died in the shootout with the police, the other went to prison. So he's sentenced to jail for however long. So imagine if 26 years after being imprisoned, he comes out of prison for killing 2 people in a Boston bombing and crippling who knows how many others. And he says, I forgive the people who put me in jail. Would that impress anyone? And yet somehow people were so impressed that Nelson Mandela said he forgave the people who put him in jail. Well, what did he have to complain about? South African President P.W. Botha had on a number of occasions offered Nelson Mandela freedom from prison if he would only renounce terrorism and violence. This Mandela refused to do. He stayed in jail years longer than he needed to. He was offered as early as 1985 full release if he would just renounce violence. And by the way, while we're about it, Chris Hani, who I shared the gospel and confronted at a press conference in Washington, D.C., Chris Hani was killed in 1993, you may recall, just before Easter 1993. He was assassinated. And Winnie Mandela, that's Nelson Mandela's ex-wife, and Bantu Holomisa was the head of Transkei, who were both in ANC at the time, said this was an inside assassination attempt which Thabo Mbeki organized, which Nelson Mandela was aware of, to assassinate the man who was the main competitor for Nelson Mandela and would certainly been Mandela's number 2, his deputy president, instead of Thabo Mbeki, and would have therefore been the next president after Mandela. Because he was a very charismatic speaker. He's a very, very charismatic speaker and quite an intelligent person, and the head of the Southern Communist Party and the head of the Umkhonto we Sizwe. And so he got assassinated by the ANC. Of course, they blamed it on Conservative Party and things like that. But isn't it interesting? I mean, I don't know what the truth is, but Winnie Mandela and Bantu Holomisa both say it was an inside job. Interesting. So many people may highly respect and idolize Nelson Mandela because of the Invictus film, produced by Clint Eastwood, who we would have expected something better from, but the very positive image portrayed on him through the mass media. However, many South Africans would disagree. Nelson Mandela remains a controversial figure. In this film, which is the first time in history that I can recall that a president gets the credit for a team winning a match. I mean, if he could help a rugby team win the World Cup rugby, why didn't he help a soccer team win the World Cup soccer? Anyway, the name of the film, Invictus, is the name of an anti-Christ poem written by an anti-Christian William Ernst Henley. This poem is quoted twice in the film to soaring music, including at the climax, and its title is the title of this film. Okay. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. How about that? Now, what is this gate that's straight? Jesus is this gate. He's the narrow one. What is the scroll that's charged with punishments? The Bible. This is an antichrist poem written by an antichrist atheist, specifically, and says, whatever gods there are, he declares, I am the captain of my soul, I'm the master of my fate. So this is an antichrist film. And the title should have alerted anyone who knows the origin of this poem and the content of this poem that this is an antichrist poem. Nelson Mandela is antichrist. He hated Christians, he hated Christ, he hated the Bible, he hated prayer, he waged a war against Christianity in his country. When he was elected president in 1994, it was either The Economist or the Mail, the Times, one of the top papers in England. I remember seeing the editorial which says, spare a thought for Nelson Mandela. His real problem in South Africa is not just the racist Afrikaans Boer apartheid regime people. It's Calvinism. The real war in South Africa is against Calvinism. And that's Mandela's primary goal, is to destroy Calvinism. And I think that is an honest, accurate summing up. In fact, I think that British editorial is more honest there than they would normally admit to. What you're dealing with, Antichrist. And I've noticed Clint Eastwood might be conservative in some ways, but he is not pro-Christian. He puts anti-Christian elements in his films. And that's why he probably liked Nelson Mandela's story. Now, the real hero of this story should have been Francois Pienaar, who, by the way, is a tall person, unlike Matt Damon. But Francois Pienaar is a dedicated Christian. And he prayed before and after every match with the team. There was a very strong core of dedicated evangelical Christians who prayed in that victorious Springbok rugby team of 1995. And they don't have that in the film. And they've just, in fact, at the end, in the lamest conclusion possible, they have, Castor, will you pray? He prays, Lord, thank you that you let us win this match. Francois Pienaar says, that's not what we prayed. We thank God after every match. We would have gotten on our knees and thanked him even if we lost. It didn't matter whether we won or lost. We still bowed the knee to the Lord and we acknowledged him. It wasn't about winning the match. We would have thanked the Lord for this match, whatever the results were. And Francois Pienaar led the prayer too. But it's like everything they can do, they twist. And they even turned Francois Pienaar into cardboard cutout, two-dimensional, narrow-minded white racist. I mean, all the whites are cardboard cutout white racists. All the blacks are noble, wonderful, revolutionary figures in this film Invictus, and even more so in the Mandela Long Walk to Freedom film. But this is the kind of garbage that they dish out in, and this blasphemer has played God in how many different films now as well. It's just bizarre. And yes, well, this was real propaganda. Well-made propaganda, but propaganda nonetheless. And it even has Francois Pienaar swearing in the match, which, as a born-again Christian, he said he never did that. So, they're just twisting, but this is the way Clint Eastwood twists things. And, of course, I personally think this is probably the cleverest move Mandela ever did politically, putting on a Springbok rugby journey, identifying with the Boers at their world triumph. I mean, what politician would say no to an audience of 2 billion and a chance to, boost his... And after this, there were a lot of people who had been anti-Mandela who became pro-Mandela. I started hearing Afrikaans people speaking about Oom Nelson. Like, Oom Nelson? Is he a mal? What we are missing is the history of communism, the context, the Cold War context. The Invictus and Mandela Long Walk to Freedom film and book do not give you the context of the Cold War, the Soviet Union menace, the Soviet warships in our harbors, the Cuban forces on our borders in Mozambique and Angola, the Russian tanks in Luanda and Maputo, the Cuban forces coming in by the tens of thousands into our neighboring countries, training revolutionaries, communist missiles on our doorstep in Angola and Mozambique. Fidel Castro's puppet client states, where he was installing Soviet puppet states on our borders, the so-called frontline states. Here you got it. This is a camp. You can see this is Operation Smokeshell, 1980. South African officer and soldier outside with a Russian P-76 amphibious tank. And here's the classroom. We took these pictures off the walls from the other side and put them here just so that you could get a composite picture. SWAPO training camp, Soviet rank structure, lecture notes. But Brezhnev, man in charge of the Soviet Union at the time, Castro, the dictator of Cuba, they were on other walls, but they were just brought there. It just shows you what we were dealing with. And here's the Marx brothers. Lenin, Karl Marx, Engels. This is communist commissars training SWAPO terrorists in Angola. This is the context that they do not let you know. Nelson Mandela wasn't a poet like Solzhenitsyn who ended in jail for something he wrote. He was a terrorist. He was a mass murderer. We were having people at that time being murdered all over Africa in the name of freedom, being tied to a pole and shot by their own people. That was the liberation going on throughout Africa. And the Soviet Union was supporting the ZAPU terrorists in the north and from Zambia, and the Red Chinese were supporting Zanla of Mugabe from the east, and they were attacking Rhodesia on an 85% of the front. Landmines, terrorists being murdered, people being murdered by the terrorists, butchering of the Madibili, all of this killing of missionaries, Red Cross ambulance officials, chopping of people's ears, lips, because they spoke against a commissar, butchering missionaries. This is the context. Mandela was not put in jail for writing a poem. He is part of a worldwide communist revolutionary terrorist offensive, which was killing people and being armed to the teeth with vast amounts of Soviet weaponry. I mean, just look at the huge amounts of armor and tanks and missiles being provided. Huge amounts. Look at that. Over 1,890 surface-to-air missiles being provided to our communist neighbors. For what reason? To threaten us. The grenades that they used from the Soviet Union. The mortars that they used from either Soviet Union or Red China, as you can see from the script. Inside a country, the World Council of Church Affiliates were marching under Soviet Union banners while they were burning people to death with necklace murders. The entire top executive of the ANC were Communist Party members, as was testified to by Bartholomew Klopani. Bartholomew Klopani, who was a senior Politburo member of the Southern Communist Party, went to Washington, D.C. as a guest of Senator Jeremiah Denton, and in the Denton Commission testified how the Soviet KGB totally controlled the Southern Communist Party and the African National Congress, which were nothing but puppets and KGB active measures. Now, Senator Denton expressed great concern for the safety of Bartholomew Klopani, who is a person who had turned from communism and was testifying, but he had been converted to Christ and he wanted to give the word out. Bartholomew Klopani was murdered by ANC terrorists as he came back within months of giving this testimony in Washington, D.C. And not only was he and his wife killed in a home in Soweto, but their daughter, Pansy Klopani, was crippled. I went with Pansy Klopani a few years later to Germany, to the Kirchentag, that's a church day in Frankfurt. And Pansy Klopani, I was pushing her in a wheelchair because she's paralyzed from the neck down. From the same thugs who murdered her parents had crippled her. I'm pushing in a wheelchair, and along come these thugs, shaking boxes of matches in her faces, saying, "We're going to burn you alive. When you get back to South Africa, the comrades will burn you alive. You're going to be neckless." That's the kind of thugs we were dealing with at that time. The Communist Party was totally controlling ANC, and the Soviet Union was completely controlling the ANC. These are the kind of weapons, Soviet weaponry, plastic explosives, AKMs, you name it, the whole lot. This girl, Cornelia Kukamore, is one of the young victims horribly burned by a suitcase bomb with a can of petrol in the suitcase with the bomb. And so it was like a napalm fuel bomb that went off in the station next to her and her grandmother. Her grandmother was killed. That was a 77-year-old grandmother, died. 23 people injured, and she is one of the people maimed. This is one of the exhibits at the Rivonia trial where Mandela was found guilty. And by the way, he pleaded guilty to the charges. He said he supported the Church Street bombing of 1983 in his book, Long Walk to Freedom, and all the other, like Kalahari Sands bombings. And there's just no ends of, this is what the ANC was doing. Bombings of public places, like the Magoo bar bombing in Durban, which was that creep. Yeah, McBride, who became someone in charge of police in Joburg, and unbelievable. He's a murderer. 3 girls killed through that. They were merchants of death. Sorry for these pictures, but this is the necklace murders. Burning people alive. This is what Nelson Mandela was supporting. Because he's fighting against the apartheid army. Just reminding you that the apartheid army was as black as it was white. And the whites were conscripted, but the black people volunteered. We were not fighting against black and white. We were fighting against red. It was black and white together against red. And this is it. This man is not black. He's red. He's not hated because he's black. He's red. I mean, to us, these are the Reds. These are the communists. Our friends were the black Christians who we are seeking to protect. Our enemies were the black and white communists. And this is it. The color of the flag tells you the issue. It was not a black and white battle. It's a black and white against red. The St. James Massacre is just another example of the kind of terrorist attacks that were happening at that time, which is the context, or the Shell House Massacre. Nelson Mandela was out of jail. It was the run-up to the elections, and he ordered the Shell House Massacre. He ordered his security people to open fire with automatic machine guns, which were illegal, by the way. And they were never prosecuted, on unarmed Inkatha Zulu protesters marching past Shell House. And he never had to stand trial for it. I mean, this is something that would destroy another politician. And of course, Invictus doesn't mention any of the communist context, the Cold War, but instead they have this icon. Invictus speaks of him being imprisoned in a cell for 30 years. Well, actually, he's on Robben Island for 18 years. I don't know how that becomes 30 years, but anyway, they just exaggerate. You get this limestone quarry where they quarried a lot of the stone for the castle in the 17th century. But you can go there now, and they've got a, what do you call this? It's a statue of Nelson Mandela chipping away rocks like he was made to do hard labor. Not really. I know that one of the things Nelson Mandela complained to me about was the Boers wouldn't let him wear long trousers. There's a lot of pictures of him wearing long trousers. He also complained to me that the Boers wouldn't let him wear sunglasses. But this picture is at the Nelson Mandela Gateway Museum in Waterfront. They obviously did let him wear sunglasses, but maybe not immediately. But at any rate, and this is evidently long trousers. And by the way, that doesn't look like a prison uniform to me. It looks like they had a lot. In fact, I'm told that they had a lot of freedom on Robben Island. They weren't locked in their cells all day and night. They were allowed out of the cells around the island during the day. They were only had to be in at night time in the cells. So Robben Island was actually, if I had to be locked up anywhere in Africa in the 1980s, Robben Island would have probably been the least unpleasant of all the prison options, because you had more freedom there, because you're on an island surrounded by sharks and nobody had ever escaped from Robben Island, and therefore you had a lot of freedom on the island. And this is how he portrays this. But if you go in there now, they don't even have the bed. They just have mattress on the floor, and the table's not even there. Forget about the chair. What they don't show you is the bookcase and the table and the books and all the other things he had, including a picture of Winnie Mandela. They don't show that to the tourists. That might give you the right idea. And yeah, Robben Island actually had a phenomenal amount of, it's a very interesting island to go and see, and I've traveled around it too when it was an operational prison, and found it, in fact, quite a delightful paradise, to be honest. Okay, it's a prison, but outside the prisoners were wandering around a really nice island. And what's also fascinating is you could be on this island, the whole of Cape Town could be in deluge of rain, and they could be in sunshine on this island. It's like a different ecosystem. Yep. Under Nelson Mandela's presidency, an average of 25,000 people were murdered every year. Yet to celebrate his birthdays, Nelson Mandela would regularly open prison doors and set many convicted criminals, including armed robbers, murderers and rapists, free. Some of these were raping and murdering within 24 hours of being released. Well over 100,000 people were murdered under Nelson Mandela's term as president. In fact, that's the lowest stats. It could be a lot more. And what do we get today? People standing on bridges, throwing rocks on cars driving below because of race politics unleashed by Mandela. How many people have been killed just in recent weeks by people throwing rocks down on vehicles? And there was a stupid article just a while ago, last week I read, that a stone throwing went horribly wrong when the stone thrower was attempting to throw a concrete block off a bridge and he fell off himself and was crushed by a truck. I thought, how does this go horribly wrong? If it went right, then he would have killed the people in the vehicle. Instead, the person who's trying to kill the people in the vehicle killed himself. How is that going horribly wrong? You know, are they suggesting that it would have been better if he had succeeded in his plan of throwing a rock in a vehicle? So under the devil, Hendrik Verwoerd, South Africa averaged 170 murders, actually 169 murders a year between 1948 and 1989. And under Mandela, about 25,000 murders a year. And yet you sort of wonder, since 1994, it's like the end of the world for some people. The racism, the violence, the farm murders, these are people who've been murdered. I won't show pictures of the farm murders, but just some of the victims of the farm murders. These are people killed while Mandela was president, and he never condemned the farm murderers. And this is something that continues as a great scandal. He started this so-called land reform business, which has been a complete disaster. And we've marched to Parliament, we've protested on all the different things. There's a lot of facts of Mandela that most people do not want to know. But truth is hate for those who hate the truth. In the 1970s, even when facing terrorism, riots, engaged in a border war with the Cubans in Angola, the South African rand was stronger than the US dollar. But after years of international sanctions, the South African rand fell to 2 rand to the dollar. This used to be real money. This could buy more in my youth than 500 rand note can buy today. A lot more. Mandela's first 4 years as president, the rand lost 80% of its value, and more than 2.8 million man-days were lost to strikes. The national debt doubled under Mandela. Even with no war, no sanctions, no riots, no conscription, massive international foreign aid, the rand plummeted to 8 rand to dollar, to 10 rand to dollar, to 12 rand to dollar. Even The Economist, a liberal publication, described Mandela's presidency at the time as a failure. That he was only good at kissing babies and shaking hands and making speeches, but he'd done absolutely nothing in terms of leadership for the country. Economic deterioration, skyrocketing crime marred his presidency. And you can just see the rand versus other currencies. There's the dollar on that side, and the ANC's destroyed the rand. In 1960, our growth rate was 6%, today 2.5%. Inflation rate then was 2%, today 6.3%. Unemployment was 4 to 5%. Under Verwoerd, today it's 40 to 65%, depending what statistics you're using. The ANC was here. Debt going up beyond what any taxpayer can ever afford. 500,000 rand per taxpayer. That's what our national debt is right now. And so thank you for voting ANC, ensuring your bright future. Zuma's home, Zuma's kaya, Zuma's follows kaya's. And this is what's happened to the police. The police in this country were once one of the smartest, most efficient people imaginable. Today, they're soft on crime, they're tolerant of corruption. This picture was taken by thieves robbing a police station. The entire police station was asleep. And they posted the pictures of the police. This, by the way, is what the police used to look like. This is back when they were a serious force, when people respected the police. They can't even spell stop. They can't even spell school. They don't even know what the road signs are saying. I mean, they can't even tell what the correct number is. They don't even know the animal identifications. They're not even sure what a wheelbarrow is there for. And so, the heritage of Mandela is riots, more riots, destruction of property, even police vans, burning of buses, burning of university campuses, destruction on the hundreds of thousands of rands a year. And yet the the chancellor of this university in Durban, Westville, said he was grateful that not much serious damage was done. Yeah, this is not much serious damage, according to the chancellor. This is University of Cape Town. Destruction of irreplaceable works of arts. This, you see, under apartheid, people were at least taught to respect their neighbors and to respect one another's cultures. Now you're taught to despise and to hate and to destroy, and this is not the way to create good neighborliness and respect for your neighbors. This isn't the kind of situation you think, oh gee, this is exactly where I want to send my daughter to study. I mean, this is Mandela's legacy. He unleashed this upon us, and this is what he encouraged. And now we've got these kind of demonic, I want free everything. Mandela went around the country promising free everything. So I was told by Earl Stegen that when he came to Zululand after he was elected, people said, but you were promising us free education, free homes, free this and the other and so on. And Mandela said, what boy, when he wants a girl's hand, won't promise her things which he can't offer later? And then they all went, I mean, what he said is, I lied to you. And he was allowed to get away with that? That's the problem. He promised free education from the beginning. And yet today we've got corruption killing us. The ANC is like a tick. Governments create wealth like ticks create blood. They suck it out of you. They produce nothing but infection disease. And now you've got 4 first ladies, for goodness sakes. This is the ANC. Even Desmond Tutu says the ANC is worse than apartheid. Oh, you don't say. Even Julius Malema, who doesn't know what he's talking about, says it was better under apartheid. Well, how would he know? He wasn't even there at the time. But let's show you a few pictures of the old South Africa and see what you think. This is the old Johannesburg Jan Smuts Airport. This is what our flight attendants, no, they were then called stewardesses, like. This is what Johannesburg used to look like. Johannesburg was called the city built on gold. This is considered the richest piece of real estate on earth. The British Parliament called Johannesburg the Witwatersrand. Johannesburg. What do you think? How does this look like to you? Yep, this is the way it was when we weren't free. It's what Zoo Lake looked like. Can you believe that we had beaches this clean and towns this beautiful, and you could travel in the shade? This is Joubert Park, what our swimming pools used to be. Zoo Lake, Union Buildings. This is when you could access them, by the way. Johannesburg, Cape Town. Oh, you see all those trees up on Lion's Head? Okay, this is ANC ruled South Africa. You can see this is the city that once was paved with gold, built in gold. This is Johannesburg. This is how it is under ANC. This is freedom. This is after 20 years of freedom. And they're burning, destroying, looting, pillaging. This is why things are so expensive. Because you've got to repair, replace, pay all the insurance. I mean, no wonder bus tickets cost as much as they do. If they keep torching buses at this rate, who's going to insure these vehicles? Looting, destroying. This is the legacy of Nelson Mandela. And so why should I write a tribute to him? Why should my son write a tribute to Nelson Mandela when he has unleashed hell on this country and he's turned one of the greatest countries in the world into one of the worst? Destruction of irreplaceable works of art, destruction of Hout Bay, destruction of everything these people have been given, and the people who've taken in these squatters so generously are repaid like this. That's all Hout Bay. I don't think they're carrying those bricks to build something. I've just got the suspicion that they've got something else in mind. And deforestation. Massive arson. We have had scores of fires in the Cape every year caused by arson, caused by the ANC, who say we must make the Cape ungovernable. We have never had so many fires in the history of the Cape as we have since the ANC has said they've got to get the Cape by making it ungovernable. And that's why we have a serious drought. They've chopped down millions of trees and they've burned down thousands of hectares of forestry reserves. And Knysna was over 50 separate fires started by arson. And this is something that's part of the ANC government. They inspire this. And where is this going to end? This isn't about to bring about wonderful race relations. This isn't going to make people love their neighbors when they have squatters coming in who burn, destroy, loot, kill, pillage, torture. This is the heritage of Nelson Mandela. It would appear to be an abuse of education to require students to write a positive tribute or dedication to any political figure whom they and their family have serious reservations about, to put it nicely. Education is about teaching people how to think critically. Indoctrination is teaching people what to think. This is a whole lot of government textbooks, which I must admit probably aren't worth anything anyway, but they weren't delivered, and they just in the end being pulped because they weren't delivered to the schools in the whole year. And yes, thank you. It's nice to know that our cleaning services and sanitation staff believe in making a mess like this. So imagine a stormtrooper in Star Wars. I know that Darth Vader is a tyrannical criminal, but if I say anything, the whole empire will call me racist because he's black. I mean, how stupid is that? In any civilized and free society, there needs to be room for dissent. Medical personnel who do not want to be part of an abortion should not be forced against their conscience to participate. A teacher who believes in traditional family values should not be required to teach what they see as immorality and perversion. Nor should any student be required to idolize, whether through an assignment or through singing, the praises of a politician. However, we are meant to forget the facts, shelve our pro-life, pro-moral, pro-family convictions, bow before this new idol, sing a politician's praises, effectively burn incense before the image of a new Caesar. Historically, Christians have steadfastly refused to bow before any idol, nor give any worship due to the Creator alone to anyone else. Daniel ended up in the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown to the fiery furnace. Countless Christians were thrown to the lions in the arena for refusing to engage in the statism, the worship of the state leader of their day. I believe Margaret Thatcher is the greatest British Prime Minister in recent British history. Most people in Britain mourned her death. But it wouldn't be reasonable to expect every child in Great Britain to write a tribute to Margaret Thatcher. Ronald Reagan is widely recognized as one of the greatest presidents in recent American history. But you couldn't imagine a requirement that every school child in the whole United States has got to write a positive tribute to Ronald Reagan. Some would surely disagree, despite the great things he achieved. It's not reasonable to have railroad South African school children into a celebrity cult of a past president who beat his first wife, who committed many serial adulteries, who beat up people who disagreed with him in his Politburo in the early days before he was in prison, who legalized abortion and a whole host of other things. We would be wiser to focus our children's attention on things that are uplifting and upbuilding to all. No Christian can in good conscience participate in idolatry. God, our Creator and eternal Judge, is the only one who deserves our worship, our praise and adoration. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by yoke of slavery. You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge your sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. So, recently, we had the ANC celebrating in 2014, was it? The beginning of the 2014 elections cycle. They had a big scene in our stadium. They had a witch doctor opening the whole thing. They first told everyone no alcohol allowed in the stadium. Then they made a big ceremony of opening champagne, drinking the champagne in the stadium. We were outside. It was part of a Great Commission course, distributing anti-communist and gospel leaflets to the participants, and people came up and said, free, free, it's all free. What's free? Everything's free. Well, what do you mean? Food, border. I mean, people walking out with bottles of drinks, and we got free T-shirts. I even got a free T-shirt. Yep, abortion, necklacing, and communism. That's what we think of the ANC. 103 years of selfless people struggle. I don't know what I'm going to do with this T-shirt, but I suppose we could take it to the shooting range. Back in 1995 and 96, we marched 30,000 people to Parliament to protest Nelson Mandela's paganization policies. We marched under Grondwet op Godswet, Constitution upon God's law. We made a stand against their attempts to legalize abortion, pornography, prostitution, gambling, all these evils. I mean, can you imagine we could mobilize so many people in Capes on that stage? The mobilization was phenomenal, and the people were adamant that we must end this evil. Well, Nelson Mandela summoned me to his palace as a result of this march, and Mandela actually we marched on the Thursday, on the Tuesday. On the Thursday I was summoned to his mansion, and so we went, and Mandela had an interesting approach. I had an hour with him. So the first thing he said is, "So, Mr. Hammond, what were you doing in the years of struggle?" I said, "I was fighting people like you, sir." And he stood up, laughed, slapped his knee, shook my hand again. He said, "I'm so happy to meet an honest white man. All the whites I've met have told me they always opposed apartheid. They never supported the National Party. I wondered how the National Party stayed in power for 40 years. I said, "Well, Mr. President, make no mistake, we're fighting against communism. We're fighting against terrorism, not fighting for apartheid." And then he said, "Apartheid was the greatest evil in the history of the world." I said, "I can't agree with that, Mr. President. That prize belongs to your friends, your supporters, the communists. They've killed 169 million civilians in the 20th century. I'm not talking about people killed in war by invading armies. I mean civilians killed by their own governments, secular governments, socialist governments, communist governments, your friends. 66 million Christians killed in the Soviet Union under Stalin and Lenin. Over 69 million people killed in Red China under Mao Zedong. Yes, still silence. I continued with Pol Pot killing 40% of the population of Cambodia, went through the Khmer Rouge, went all my way through to Mengistu, who is a friend of his who just visited the country, and his Red Terror butchering the people in Ethiopia. He's still silent. So I went all the way through to Fidel Castro and all that he had done in Cuba, because he had just had him as a guest in the country. And then I stopped, and then Mandela leaned backwards and he looked into the ceiling like he's retrieving something in his memory, and he said, "When I was a prisoner of the Boers on Robben Island, they would not allow me to wear sunglasses." I said, "Well, Mr. President, my eyes are also very sensitive, and I understand how unpleasant and painful it must have been. But I'm sure you'll agree that hardly compares with the atrocities documented by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago." And then he said, "You know, Christians justified apartheid 48 years ago." I said, "Mr. President, it won't be 48 years from now. People will question your humanity for legalizing abortion. You have replaced apartheid with abortion, and abortion's worse. You've replaced discrimination on the basis of race with discrimination on the basis of age. And this isn't just putting them on a separate voters roll and giving them separate facilities. This is taking away their right to life. It's killing them. This is the worst apartheid of all. It's separating a mother from an unborn child. It's separating a child from its life support system." He came up with some other things. I pointed out to him, "Well, you know, you talk about the apartheid in South Africa. You must surely know what was going on in Eastern Europe, where your friends had put a Berlin Wall and an Iron Curtain stretching across the whole of Europe, separating slave from free, shooting people in the back for attempting to escape from one part of Berlin going to the other. You supported, in fact, your Shashaba magazine, that's the ANC's magazine, was printed by the Stasi, the East German secret police in East Berlin. You've got to be aware that this was not just dividing people of different races, but dividing people of the same country, the same language, even separating brothers and sisters and family members by a wall where they shot people in the back for attempting to move from one part to the other." I said, "Communism is the greatest evil that this world has ever seen." And we bounced backwards and forwards like this for a while. And at a certain point he stood up, clock struck the hour, And he stood up like on the hour and said, "You may take your pictures now." And it really hadn't crossed my mind. I hadn't thought of it. I hadn't brought a camera. I wasn't interested. What on earth would I do with a picture of me and Mandela? I said, "No, thank you." And he stood there in shock, and his jaw dropped open. Literally, his mouth was gaping open for a while. We might have been the first people who didn't want the pictures taken with him. He stood there in total shock. And at this point I said, "But we would like to pray for you, Mr. President." And he said, no, that's very private. I'd rather not." And I acted like I hadn't heard a word. I put my hand on one shoulder, Dominis Stevens to put a hand on the other shoulder, prayed, "Lord Jesus, do not give Mr. Mandela one moment's peace. Do not allow him to have a moment's rest until he does what he knows what is right, until he enacts legislation to protect the most innocent, helpless citizens of all from the evil of the violence of abortion. Lord, do not allow Mr. Mandela any peace until he does what he knows is right, until he bows the knee to you as King Jesus, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords." And prayed along this line. Well, when I opened my eyes, I could see he was steaming, but he maintained a cool exterior. I mean, he's a very charismatic personality, very suave politician. And he said, "My door is always open to you, Mr. Hammond. I'm always responsive to the concerns of your constituency." So that's the last I saw of him. We left. Now, that was Thursday. We marched on Tuesday. He summoned us on Thursday. Monday morning, at our door of our mission, 2 senior investigators of the Inland Revenue Service began a 13-year audit. They went back 6 years. They carried on for 7 years. We had 13-year audit. And you know what an audit is? They required affidavits for everything. Grandparents' gifts, for kidney transplant operations, things for the kids, all sorts of things. Petty. We had to employ a full-time person just to handle the bookkeeping requirements of them. But fortunately, by God's grace, our first chairman of the board, Reverend Doc Watson, was a chartered accountant. And he had always insisted that we have very good books. And he had come, every time he visited the mission, he wanted to see our books, and he would run his finger down a page and would, in seconds, he could tell if something was wrong out. I mean, he had that mind. I said, "How do you do that?" He said, "Well, we were made chartered accountants before the calculators, and we had to run a finger down a page and at the end have it all add up." And that was pounds, shillings and pence. It wasn't even metric. And so his mind was brilliant. But he harassed us, and I must say, I many a time regretted we had a chartered accountant as our chairman of the board. But he prepared us for that day. Because when Mandela's dogs were set on us, you know, if our books had been anything but sterling, they could have put us away. I mean, that's how Bill Clinton dealt with his opponents in America. Set the revenue service on IRS. And so there was Clinton's pal Mandela doing the same thing. And they could have destroyed us. But our books were so immaculate that after 13-year audit, they had to conclude we owed them nothing. Our books were in order. And that was a miracle. That was God's grace and mercy. That was thanks to Doc Watson in particular. But it just shows you, to our face, Mandela was charming, but he set his dogs at us. And that's the kind of person we're dealing with. We're dealing with, in Nelson Mandela, he was a communist, he was a liar. He said for over 50 years he wasn't a communist. And the moment he died, everyone admitted, all the people around him, his wives and everyone, he always was a senior member of the Communist Party of the Politburo, and we just had to, for tactical reasons, deny that he's a communist. But he always was a communist, and the communists have lifted him up, and he always was consistent communist. And I could see that. Mr. Scarborough could see that. Any of people like Ada Parker who studied these things could see it. But some people wanted to believe he is a good man, and they've idolized him in that way. But he was willing to lie and perjure himself, even on a matter of his most core identity, that he was a communist, for the tactics that he could take a Christian country and make it anti-Christian. So Psalm 2 is a very appropriate message to any of these leaders. Kiss the Son lest he be angry, and you perish in a way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed all those who put their trust in him.